Have you ever glanced at a medieval map of Central Europe and thought, why does what we call Germany look like a quilt of tiny states? From princely domains and ecclesiastical bishoprics to imperial free cities, the land seemed fragmented into hundreds of jurisdictions, each with its own ruler, laws, and intrigues. In today's extended deep dive, we'll peel back the layers of history to uncover the many factors that fractured medieval Germany, the legacy of Charlemagne's Grand Empire, the delicate balance of power between emperors and local nobles, the profound impact of the Investiture Controversy, and even the cultural tapestry that wove together diverse dialects and traditions. By the end of this journey, running well over 30 minutes, you'll have a clearer understanding of how geography, politics, faith, and local identity converged to create a fragmented realm. Stick around, as we unravel the threads that made medieval Germany both complex and fascinating. Welcome to our comprehensive exploration of why Germany was so fragmented in the Middle Ages. Today, we'll be traveling back over 1,000 years, moving through pivotal eras like the collapse of Charlemagne's empire, the emergence of the Holy Roman Empire, and the intense disputes between emperors and the Church. This was no straightforward story of a single crown ruling a uniform land. Instead, it's a testament to how competing interests and historical happenstance can forge a patchwork of authority so intricate that it sometimes makes modern political maps look simple by comparison. Over the next several segments, we'll examine how royal ambitions clashed with local freedoms, how ecclesiastical lords became power brokers in their own right, and why cultural and linguistic diversity played such a pivotal role. From the earliest dynasties to the eventual lead-up to the Reformation, you'll see how countless forces molded the medieval German lands. So, grab a comfortable seat, because we're about to embark on a journey through centuries of evolving governance, religious controversies, shifting alliances, and everyday life shaped by feudal obligations and local identities. Let's set off into this labyrinth of medieval history. To understand the fragmented puzzle of medieval Germany, we have to start with the Carolingian dynasty, most notably, Charlemagne, also known as Karl der Grosse. By 800 AD, Charlemagne had managed to consolidate a vast territory spanning much of Western and Central Europe. Through military campaigns, alliances, and ecclesiastical support, he built an empire that was, for its time, remarkably coherent. But this coherence was short-lived. Upon Charlemagne's death in 814, his successors faced the unenviable task of preserving the integrity of an empire stitched together by their larger-than-life predecessor. The famous Treaty of Verdun, 843, effectively began the fracturing process by dividing the Carolingian Empire among Charlemagne's grandsons. The eastern portion, often referred to as East Francia, would evolve into what we loosely term medieval Germany. This inheritance was a mosaic of tribes, local leaders, and varying traditions. The Carolingians tried to maintain centralized institutions, but each generation faced internal disputes and external pressures, leading local nobles to assert their independence. Far from being a stable monolith, the East Frankish realm became a testing ground for feudal relationships. While the king was recognized as a supreme leader, real power often rested in the hands of dukes and counts who commanded the loyalty of their vassals. This set the stage for centuries of decentralized governance, embedding the seeds of fragmentation that would flourish later. By the early 10th century, the Carolingian grip on East Francia had weakened considerably, creating opportunities for new powers to step up. One such power was the Ottonian dynasty, founded by Henry the Fowler and elevated by his son, Otto I, famously known as Otto the Great. Otto's crowning as Holy Roman Emperor in 962 signaled a renaissance of centralized ambition, at least on paper. Otto leveraged strong ties with the Church, granting lands and privileges to bishops and abbots in return for loyalty. In many ways, this imperial church system worked brilliantly. It offered a cohesive administrative network and helped Otto project authority across vast distances. Yet, this strategy also contained a hidden vulnerability. Over time, these ecclesiastical princes grew in wealth and influence, sometimes vying with secular nobles for power. When future emperors attempted to appoint their own candidates for bishoprics, it sparked fierce disputes, sowing further discord among local rulers. Despite Otto's efforts, the realm remained a patchwork of stem duchies: Saxony, Swabia, Bavaria, Franconia, and others, each with deep-rooted histories and local allegiances. While Otto the Great successfully suppressed rebellions, subsequent Ottonian rulers struggled to maintain a cohesive structure. Thus, the very policies that built short-term stability laid long-term foundations for Germany's enduring fragmentation. Before delving deeper, it's crucial to understand the structure of the Holy Roman Empire itself. Neither holy nor Roman, nor an empire, as Voltaire famously quipped centuries later. Though Otto I's coronation is often cited as the empire's origin, its identity took shape gradually through legal and religious traditions. The emperor's legitimacy was linked to Roman imperial heritage and Christian universalism, giving the occupant of the throne a grand sense of spiritual and temporal authority. However, the empire's day-to-day reality was far less centralized than, say, the emerging monarchy in France. The emperor was considered the supreme protector of Christendom in these lands, but each local lord, be they duke, bishop or count, held considerable sway over their territories. Administration depended more on personal oaths and feudal bonds than on a standing bureaucracy or a uniform set of laws. Indeed, the emperor's direct power often extended only over his own ancestral lands. Moreover, imperial diets, assemblies, brought princes together to discuss policy, but these gatherings were as much about negotiation as they were about governance. Decisions required consensus or compromise among a multitude of power players, each eager to protect or expand their jurisdiction. Far from forging unity, these assemblies frequently highlighted the emperor's dependence on the magnates who formed the backbone of his support. One of the most pivotal conflicts in medieval German history was the Investiture Controversy, primarily spanning the 11th and 12th centuries. At its core, this was a struggle over who held the authority to invest bishops with the symbols of their spiritual office, the emperor or the pope. If emperors could choose bishops, they ensured loyalty within key territories. If popes controlled appointments, they could undermine imperial influence from within. Henry IV and Pope Gregory VII personified this clash. When Gregory excommunicated Henry, it shocked the Christian world and encouraged German princes to revolt against a ruler deemed heretical. Henry famously walked to Canossa in 1077, barefoot in the snow, to seek absolution, a dramatic moment showcasing how papal power could bring an emperor to his knees. Even though Henry regained strength later, the conflict unleashed internal strife, as ambitious nobles picked sides or exploited the chaos to assert independence. By the time the Concordat of Worms, 1122, settled the formalities, granting the church the right to invest bishops spiritually, while the emperor had a say in their temporal, secular power, much damage had already been done to imperial unity. In essence, this long-drawn feud weakened the emperor's ability to dictate terms to regional powers. The cracks in Germany's political unity widened, as local potentates seized on every advantage to entrench their autonomy. Even before the Investiture Controversy, medieval Germany was divided into stem duchies, traditional tribal domains that traced their origins to ancient Germanic tribes. Saxony, Bavaria, Swabia, Franconia, and Lotharingia, later subdivided, each held distinct legal customs, military traditions and noble families. Rulers of these duchies guarded their privileges jealously. As the empire's central authority fluctuated, dukes became quasi-monarchical figures in their own right. They collected taxes, raised armies, and administered justice, often with minimal interference from the emperor. While they owed nominal fealty to the imperial throne, they forged alliances, intermarried with other noble houses, and sometimes rivaled the emperor in prestige. Adding to this noble ascendancy were counts, margraves, and landgraves who, though lower in rank, still governed sizable territories. Through strategic marriages, inheritances, and the occasional military conquest, these families built regional dynasties that could rival or surpass ducal power. In this environment, any attempt by the emperor to centralize authority required careful balancing acts, ensuring not to alienate too many powerful lords who could quickly unite against him. Amid the shifting sands of feudal hierarchy, cities began to rise as economic and political powerhouses. Thanks to burgeoning trade routes, stretching across the Alps, along the Rhine, or via Baltic sea lanes, urban centers witnessed unprecedented growth. Skilled artisans, merchants, and guilds formed the backbone of these emerging economies, giving local elites the leverage to negotiate freedoms that were not commonly granted under strict feudalism. The Holy Roman Emperor, seeking to counterbalance the might of the nobility, often granted city charters and privileges directly to these urban centers, dubbing some of them free imperial cities. This status placed them under the emperor's direct protection rather than under a local prince's control. While this seemed like a pathway toward imperial consolidation, it more often birthed fiercely independent civic republics, like Cologne, Nuremberg, and later the great trading hubs of the Hanseatic League in the north. Over time, These free cities accumulated enough wealth to field their own armies, mint coins, and enact local statutes. They formed alliances with each other, regional leagues, to secure mutual defense and trading rights. Their economic might, coupled with their political autonomy, wove another layer into Germany's variegated tapestry, further complicating any hope of forging a single united realm. No discussion of medieval Germany's fragmentation would be complete without highlighting the Hohenstaufen dynasty, prominent in the 12th and 13th centuries. Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa and his grandson Frederick II were among the most formidable medieval rulers, yet even they wrestled with the challenges of decentralization. Both aimed to rejuvenate imperial authority, yet much of their focus shifted southward, into Italy. Barbarossa launched multiple campaigns to assert control over the wealthy Lombard city-states, culminating in legendary clashes like the Battle of Legnano, 1176. While he made significant strides in German affairs, mediating disputes among dukes and strengthening royal administration, his prolonged absences from the German heartlands gave local nobles considerable freedom to govern as they saw fit. Frederick II, known for his cultural brilliance and administrative reforms, spent much of his reign in his beloved kingdom of Sicily, where he cultivated a centralized bureaucracy that impressed contemporaries. Ironically, while Sicily flourished under his rule, the German principalities grew more autonomous. When Frederick needed German support for his Italian exploits, he had to negotiate concessions to local lords, effectively trading central authority for short-term military backing. By the end of the Hohenstaufen era, Germany's fragmentation was entrenched even further. Emperor Charles IV's promulgation of the Golden Bull in 1356 was a watershed moment. Ostensibly, it sought to clarify and stabilize the imperial election process by designating 7 Prince-Electors, 3 ecclesiastical, the archbishops of Mainz, Trier and Cologne, and 4 secular, the King of Bohemia, the Count Palatine of the Rhine, the Duke of Saxony, and the Margrave of Brandenburg. This decree attempted to remove ambiguity from the succession, hoping to prevent contested elections that had historically led to civil wars. Yet, by granting these electors unquestioned preeminence, the Golden Bull effectively enshrined their near-sovereign status. Each elector could mint coins, collect tolls, and enforce their own laws without imperial interference. The emperor, in turn, depended on their favor to assume the throne. Attempts to centralize power or curtail their privileges could swiftly cost the emperor his crown. In this way, the Golden Bull codified the empire's decentralized nature, further legitimizing the reality that Germany's political landscape was more of a confederation of strong principalities than a unified monarchy. While political factors are crucial, we must also consider the vast cultural and linguistic diversity of medieval Germany. Unlike more unified realms, the empire's population spoke a range of dialects, from Low German in the northern plains to High German in the mountainous south. These linguistic differences reflected, and sometimes reinforced, local identities. A Saxon might have more in common linguistically with a Frisian or Dutch speaker than with a Swabian from the south. Customs, legal codes, and even religious practices could vary markedly from one region to the next. Town charters and regional laws drew from ancient tribal traditions, Roman legal remnants, and church canon law, creating a patchwork of statutes. Cultural heroes and epics such as the Nibelungenlied were interpreted differently across regions, further emphasizing local pride. In short, many communities identified first with their city, duchy, or region, rather than an overarching concept of Germany. This multiplicity of identities made it difficult for any ruler to rally all regions under a single banner for long. Often overlooked in the conversation about fragmentation is the influence of the Teutonic Knights. Originating as a German military order during the Crusades, the Teutonic Knights established a monastic state in the Baltic region, primarily in Prussia. This expansion, partly sanctioned by the emperor and various papal decrees, created a quasi-independent entity governed by a Grand Master, who occasionally recognized imperial authority but largely conducted foreign policy, warfare, and colonization on his own terms. While not part of the core German principalities, the Teutonic Order's presence highlighted yet another path to autonomy. They minted coins, enacted laws, and negotiated treaties, powers usually reserved for sovereign rulers. Over time, their state became a notable power in Northern Europe. Ironically, while they spread German culture eastward, they contributed to the broader trend of localized or specialized governance separate from direct imperial control. The 14th century unleashed a series of crises across Europe, with the Holy Roman Empire experiencing its own share. The Black Death ravaged cities and countryside alike. In some regions, up to half the population perished. Amid the horror of the plague, local rulers, be they city councils or territorial lords, took independent measures to quarantine their lands, limit trade, or scapegoat certain groups, notably Jewish communities, in misguided attempts to contain the disease. Simultaneously, recurring famines and economic downturns tested the resilience of feudal structures. Peasant revolts flared up when lords attempted to raise taxes or impose harsher obligations to offset losses. Each territory addressed these social and economic upheavals differently. Cities sometimes closed their gates to fleeing peasants, while certain princes tried to attract new settlers to revitalize their domains. These divergent policies further entrenched local autonomy, as overarching imperial directives were scarce or ineffective during such widespread turmoil. While fragmentation often meant chaos, it also spurred innovation in governance. During the late Middle Ages, several territorial rulers sought to modernize their administrations. They introduced land registries, standardized local laws, and created rudimentary bureaucracies to oversee taxation and justice. Such reforms occurred on a regional rather than imperial scale, driven by ambitious princes who saw the value of a well-organized state. Imperial reforms were attempted, most notably the imperial reform, Reichsreform, under Emperor Maximilian I in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. These reforms introduced imperial circles, Reichskreis, to group territories for defense and taxation purposes, but these circles often reflected existing power dynamics rather than imposing new unity. Princes who participated did so on terms beneficial to them, ensuring that while the empire gained some structure, true centralization remained elusive. By the eve of the Reformation, Germany was a checkerboard of bishoprics, imperial free cities, knightly estates, and princely territories. The Habsburgs controlled the imperial throne but faced constant challenges from other powerful dynasties. Local diets, assemblies in each principality wielded real authority, and any new imperial edict had to be ratified locally, a process rife with negotiation. Tensions were growing around the Catholic Church's perceived abuses, indulgences, simony, and clerical corruption. Many princes saw an opportunity to curtail the Church's power, redirect church wealth into state coffers, or simply assert greater independence from Rome. Martin Luther's posting of the 95 Theses in 1517 ignited a religious firestorm that would find particularly fertile ground in these fragmented lands. Each prince, noble, or city council could decide whether to embrace or suppress the Reformation, further fracturing religious unity and, by extension, the political cohesion of the empire. The fragmentation that characterized medieval Germany had repercussions extending well beyond the Middle Ages. When the Reformation erupted, the loose structure of the Holy Roman Empire allowed Lutheranism, Calvinism, and other Protestant branches to flourish in some areas while remaining banned in others. This mosaic of faiths laid the groundwork for religious conflicts like the Peasants' War and later the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, a devastating conflict that further underscored the absence of strong imperial centralization. Nonetheless, some scholars argue that this fragmentation fostered a polycentric model of economic and cultural development. Cities like Augsburg, Cologne, Regensburg, and Lübeck thrived as hubs of commerce and learning. The competition among multiple small states sometimes spurred economic innovation, eventually paving the way for the robust cultural and intellectual movements seen in the German Enlightenment centuries later. Moreover, the fierce localism contributed to the eventual shape of modern Germany, which would only unify under Prussian leadership in the late 19th century. So, why was Germany so fragmented in the Middle Ages? The answer lies in a tapestry of historical events and cultural circumstances. The division of the Carolingian Empire, feudal obligations that favored local power, ecclesiastical authorities wielding secular clout, and a Holy Roman Emperor who often relied on negotiation rather than absolute rule. Toss in the rise of independent city-states, countless noble families with dynastic ambitions, and a staggering linguistic and cultural diversity, and you have the perfect recipe for a decentralized patchwork. Yet, this fragmentation was more than just a weakness. It also spurred creativity, economic dynamism, and distinct local identities that shaped the course of European history. The Holy Roman Empire never evolved into a centralized monarchy akin to France or England, but the complexity of its political landscape left a mark on everything from the Reformation to modern European borders. Understanding this historical mosaic gives us richer insights into both Germany's past and the broader story of medieval Europe. Thank you for joining me on this comprehensive tour of medieval Germany's fragmented legacy. We've wandered through the courts of emperors, the halls of bishoprics, the bustling streets of free cities, and the battle-scarred fields of imperial disputes. If this deep dive brought clarity to the layered tapestry of the Holy Roman Empire, consider giving this video a like, sharing your insights in the comments, and subscribing for more historical explorations. Stay curious, stay thoughtful, and remember, sometimes, 1,000 little pieces reveal as much about the past as a single unified whole. Until next time, keep exploring history's endless intricacies.